Most people go through their entire lives never realizing that the version of themselves they present to the world is not entirely real. Not because they're bad people, but because the human brain was never fully designed for honesty. It was designed for survival. And that one fact changes everything.
There is a part of your brain that runs constantly in the background, like a program you never installed but cannot seem to close. Researchers call it the default mode network. It activates when you are not focused on a task, when you are daydreaming, when your mind wanders between moments. And what it does during that time is fascinating and deeply uncomfortable. It tells you stories about yourself. It replays past events and subtly rewrites them. It frames your failures as someone else's fault. It makes your victories feel earned while quietly erasing the effort behind them. All without you noticing. All without your permission. This is not a character flaw. It is biology doing exactly what it was shaped to do over hundreds of thousands of years.
Early humans did not survive by being the most honest. They survived by being the most coherent, by holding a consistent story about who they were, what their tribe valued, and where they fit inside it. Cognitive consistency was a form of social armor. If you wavered, if you second-guessed yourself in front of others, it signaled weakness, and weakness in those environments was genuinely dangerous. So the brain learned to protect the story, to patch the gaps, to smooth over contradictions before they could surface. The internal editor never sleeps, and it is extraordinarily good at its job. The problem is that we are no longer living around campfires. We are navigating relationships, careers, and personal goals that require something the ancient brain was never trained for: radical self-awareness. Psychologists who study self-deception have found something striking. People are not just occasionally dishonest with themselves. They are systematically dishonest in predictable patterns. They overestimate how disciplined they are. They underestimate how much their mood shapes their decisions. They believe they hold their values deeply right up until those values become inconvenient.
There is even a name for it: illusory superiority. The consistent tendency for people to rate themselves as more ethical, more competent, and more reasonable than statistical probability would ever allow. And virtually everyone has it, including the people who are most convinced they are immune to it. What makes this even more unsettling is what happens in the brain when someone confronts you with evidence that challenges your self-image. The same neural pathways that fire during physical pain also activate during psychological threat. The brain does not distinguish between a punch and an uncomfortable truth. Both trigger a defense response.
So what separates the people who actually change from the people who only believe they are changing? Research points to one consistent variable: not motivation, not intelligence, not even willpower. It is the capacity to observe your own thoughts without immediately defending them. This is harder than it sounds. When a thought arises that conflicts with your identity, the automatic move is to dismiss it, reframe it, or intellectualize it into something safer. True discipline, the kind that produces real and lasting change, begins the moment you pause before that defense response kicks in. Ancient Stoic philosophers described this as the space between impulse and action. They believed everything a person becomes lives inside that gap. Modern neuroscience has essentially confirmed what they were describing 2,000 years ago. The prefrontal cortex has the ability to override automatic emotional responses, but only if you train it to.
Here is what that training actually looks like. Not hour-long journaling sessions or expensive retreats. The real work happens in ordinary moments. It happens when someone cuts you off in traffic, and you notice the story your brain immediately constructs about what kind of person they must be. It happens when you fail at something and feel the pull to explain it away before you have honestly examined it. It happens in the quiet seconds after a decision, when you ask yourself whether you actually made it for the reason you told yourself you did.
Discipline is not the suppression of thought. It is the honest observation of it. And honesty, real honesty, is not about confessing things to other people. It begins entirely in private, in the space between what you feel and what you tell yourself you feel. That is where character is actually built, not in the grand moments, in the quiet, unremarkable ones that nobody else ever sees. The people who seem extraordinarily self-possessed, the ones who act with clarity even under pressure, are not people who have eliminated self-deception. They have simply developed a relationship with it. They recognize its patterns. They know which stories their brain prefers to tell. And they have learned to question those stories before acting on them. That is not a trait you were born with. It is a practice. And what matters is not how well you perform on your best days. It is how consistently you show up on the days when honesty is the harder choice. There is something quietly profound about a species that evolved to deceive itself and yet somehow developed the capacity to catch itself doing it. That tension between the ancient pull toward comfortable stories and the deeper need for truth is not a flaw in human nature. It may be the most defining feature of it. The question is never whether your brain is telling you a story. It always is. The question is whether you are paying close enough attention to hear the difference.